Hello, everyone. In this video lecture, we're going to talk about Meditations on First Philosophy, one of René Descartes' most famous works that contains the intertext or the philosophical concepts that Harlan Ellison is drawing upon in the creation of his story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. First, a few definitions. Philosophy is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. So, anytime that you're exploring something that transcends the physical nature of reality, for instance, something that could be measured or weighed empirically, you're doing philosophy. Philosophy undergirds every single scientific enterprise. That, for instance, law of non-contradiction is a philosophical premise that is assumed in scientific investigations of the universe. In turn, first philosophy is the philosophy or the study of knowledge, reality, and existence that is prior to or the basis of everything else. So first philosophy is actually getting at the groundworks of knowledge itself. Before any other system or approach to learning or to constructing, to deriving knowledge from the universe can be developed, you need the foundation of philosophy. Oftentimes, when we engage in, let's say, empiricist research in science, we don't actually think about the philosophical underpinnings of it. However, the philosophy of science, that is, the understanding of how knowledge, reality, and existence operate on the most fundamental level, is always assumed in any scientific enterprise. First philosophy is the study of the most basic or fundamental aspects of philosophy itself, and thus of reality itself. Now, while there have been various different definitions of this first philosophy provided, of what is the first philosophy, and we can look at it from myriad different perspectives. For our purposes, in essence, first philosophy is kind of synonymous with metaphysics. Metaphysics is the studying of being, or is the study of being as such. Every single thing or even concept in the universe has its own mode of being or nature. For instance, goodness, hot and cold, human beings or the status of human beings, like what is a human or what is humanity, the very concept of change and mutability, that change occurs over time, a definition of change. What does it mean for something to exist? Or what causes something to exist? Even the most fundamental question of all, why is there something rather than nothing? All of those are metaphysical questions or deal with metaphysical issues, issues pertaining to the very nature of being. Just as physics is the study of, let's say, motion and change, the operations of different physical systems, metaphysics is about the nature of being. So the underlying assumptions and the definitions that allow for the study of physical objects. For instance, in physics, we can deal with velocity. Now, velocity is the change in position over time, right? With the direction. So, in that definition of velocity, a physics concept, there is a metaphysical definition of change. What is change? What does change imply? How do we describe or define change? That more fundamental question that's just assumed and unanswered in the context of, let's say, a scientific laboratory research experiment is fundamental to the operation of the sciences. So when Descartes is meditating on first philosophy in this text that he has written, he's really talking about the definitions of the most fundamental aspects of reality. In part, this work is also focused on epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, so it's the philosophical study of knowledge. If I was to ask you, what does it mean to know something? How do you know something? What is the basis for knowing something? Any of those questions are philosophical questions. And again, in any enterprise, they're usually assumed unless we're entering into philosophy and thinking about them. Does knowledge occur when you have, let's say, 90% certainty? Can you ever really know anything? Those would be epistemological questions. Now, as I said, Descartes is heavily influenced by Renaissance humanism and the rejection of received knowledge and tradition. He's essentially trying, in this document, the Meditations on First Philosophy, to reconstruct a systematic understanding of metaphysics and of first philosophy from the ground up. Although he is not a skeptic in himself, he is using the techniques or the methodology of skepticism, wherein he is going to doubt as much as possible, call into question anything that can be called into question, eliminate as many assumptions as possible or axioms as possible to get down to what he can be truly certain about. with 100% metaphysical certitude, and then develop from there in this text. The objective of his philosophy, or of his explorations in his Meditations on First Philosophy, is to distance the mind from the senses. We already looked at empiricism and why that might be flawed, but his objective is to disconnect or decouple a philosophical understanding of the world from the physical reality that is apparent to our senses. Now, Descartes' Meditation on First Philosophy, in his overall attempt to construct a new, or to reconstruct a solid basis for knowledge of metaphysics, of first philosophy, that is, of identifying those things about which he can be sure, are laid out in a series of summaries that he provides. We're going to be concerned primarily with Meditations 1 and 2 in his book, Meditations on First Philosophy. The first meditation I have is concerning those things that can be called into doubt. Descartes summarizes the very beginning of his project, of his philosophical exploration of the nature of reality, thusly: in the first meditation, I expound on the grounds on which we may doubt in general of all things, and especially of material objects, so long at least as we have no other foundations for the sciences than those we have hitherto possessed. So he's looking at the current state of the sciences, and basically the natural sciences, which is the study of the world around us. Not science as we contemporarily understand it, but basically just the study of the world, the physical nature of reality that we see around us. Now, he says, unless we have more solid grounding for the study of these things, I am going to have to set aside that. We can doubt, in general, all things. He's going to explain why, especially the nature, existence, and qualities of material objects like a pen or a car that's traveling down the highway, or anything else that we really study in physics and the natural sciences. As long as there are no other foundations for the sciences than those we have hitherto possessed. So we don't really have that epistemic grounding. We don't have certainty about those things that we simply assume in order to allow science to be conducted. It's very much what I've already laid out. Now, although the utility of a doubt so general may not be manifest at first sight, now this is a really weird project. This is probably not going to be clear to you why it's important to do this or what purpose I have, but it'll become clear. It is nevertheless of the greatest, since it delivers us from all prejudice and affords the easiest pathway by which the mind may withdraw itself from the senses. So remember, he is prefiguring the operation of the rationalists. He is using a pure application of reason in the mind and trying to divest himself from the senses as much as possible, because the senses can lie to us. And already, looking at I have no mouth and I must scream, this idea of divesting ourselves from the senses because they can't be trusted, and we make assumptions about their reliability that cannot be justified, is probably starting to sound a little bit familiar, given how Am warps the survivor's perspective on the world. And finally, it makes it impossible for us to doubt wherever we afterwards discover truth. Now, that might not be true given what we've already said about reason and its potential lack of foundation or lack of appropriate grounding. However, his argument is that by withdrawing from the senses, I can use my reason more clearly and use it as best as possible in isolation without making any assumptions about the external world that is transmitted to me or mediated to me by way of my senses. And that is what I'm going to establish in the first meditation. I'm going to prove that I have grounds for doubting everything around me. In Meditation 2, he says, in the second, the mind which, in the exercise of the freedom peculiar to itself, supposes that no object is, of the existence of which it has even the slightest doubt, finds that meanwhile it must itself exist. Oh, now that might be a mouthful, but what he's saying is that the mind itself, if it is free, if it is liberated, if it has freedom to operate, even if every single thing that it has cause to doubt, that is, every single material thing that we perceive by way of our senses is in fact not real, the mind itself has to exist. And this point is likewise of the highest moment, for the mind is thus enabled easily to distinguish what pertains to itself, that is, to the intellectual nature, and from what may be referred to as the body. So, here he's saying that I can prove in the second meditation that the mind exists, and that doing so, allowing me to operating from this position of radical skepticism about everything side of me, every object that I perceive through my senses, I am better equipped to understand the faculties and natures of the mind as the mind, because I can so easily distinguish it now from everything that I perceive from my senses. If I'm cutting off everything that is not the mind, and I'm left with just an understanding that the mind exists, now I can start building outwards to understand what the qualities and the attributes of the mind and what is mentally dependent actually are. From these two summaries, I'm going to move into a conversation about the arguments that he develops in these two meditations. In that first meditation, concerning those things that can be called into doubt, Descartes runs through a process of radical skepticism. Again, he's not a skeptic as we understand it today. Let's say a skeptic today would be somebody who doubts the veracity of religious claims, or it never believes anything unless it can be proven to him, which of course is a knowledge claim, that a kind of moral statement that I should never believe anything that is not proven to me. And then you enter into infinite regress. Can you prove that is an appropriate maxim? Or do you have cause to doubt that? How is that proven to you? Radical skepticism leads you to that infinite regress of being skeptical of everything and reaching no actual conclusion, and thus knowledge becomes impossible. So it's ridiculous. Descartes is not a skeptic in that sense. He's not taking it to its furthest degree, but he's using it as a tool to the furthest degree that is possible within reason. He's not trapped within his skepticism. He's using skepticism as a tool. The fundamental question that he asks is, what can I know for certain without doubt or assumptions? Is there anything that I can truly know for certain with 100% metaphysical certitude and no assumptions? Now, as he seeks to answer this question, he starts to wonder, maybe I can trust my senses. Now, he throws that out immediately because, he says, our senses can so easily be fooled. In A Christmas Carol, which is completely unrelated to this, but it's an example. In A Christmas Carol, Scrooge encounters the ghost of Jacob Marley, his former business partner. And Scrooge, this miserly old wretch who is money-grubbing, penny-pinching, and never will assist anyone because he's so greedy, encounters Jacob Marley, his deceased companion and business partner, and Jacob Marley warns him about the effects of a life spent in the confines of such avarice. Scrooge says to this ghost, I don't believe you're real. And the ghost then says, what, do you doubt your own senses? You can see me, I'm sitting in this chair, I'm moving objects around the room, and you've heard my hideous screams of torment because I am a lost soul condemned to wander forever because of my greed. And Scrooge says, no, I don't believe you at all. You could be just a spot of underdone potato or a blot of mustard. And then he picks up a toothpick and he says, why, if I just swallowed this toothpick, I would be beset for the rest of my life by 1,000 phantoms like you, because you have this rotten piece of wood that's affecting your senses. Your physical body is being influenced, and it's having an effect on your senses. We hallucinate, we conjure things. A schizophrenic person might horrifyingly be condemned to a lifetime, even with medication, of occasional bouts of hallucination, visual and auditory. The senses can't be trusted. Descartes suggests the same thing. I can't trust my senses. I can't know for certain that anything that I assimilate through my senses is truly real. And he presents in this argument, in his first meditation, in Meditations on First Philosophy, the dream analogy. He says basically that when I dream, I'm not aware of it. I'm not consciously aware of the fact that I'm dreaming. Sometimes we have lucid dreams, but that world oftentimes seems as real to me as this world does when I'm waking. But even in those dreams, there are some fundamental truths that seem to apply. For instance, when I'm in a dream, there's a logic to them. 2 and 2 still make 4. So in these dreams, even in this state, although I can't tell that everything around me, that everything I see is false, there are still some truths that penetrate this illusion. So maybe I can rely on those. And he says, I don't know. I can actually conceive of a situation where 2 and 2 doesn't make 4. So maybe I can't trust those simple truths. He goes all the way then in using the position of most radical skepticism. And he says, let me assume, for the sake of argument, as I'm trying to answer this question, what can I know for certain without doubt or assumptions, that the worst case scenario is in effect. Suppose that there is an all-powerful being And this all-powerful being has devoted all of its infinite capacity to one end, to one goal, and that is to deceiving me regarding the nature of reality. In that case, let's say in this worst case scenario, even those simple truths that seem to operate within dreams might not be true. Maybe every time I think of the proposition 2 plus 2, this infinitely powerful, omniscient, and omnipotent demon, this all-powerful evil being, zaps my brain and causes me to think erroneously. So I think that the truth is that 2 plus 2, which seems a simple truth, is 4, when in reality it's 5. I could conceive of a universe in which that occurs with this fantastically all-powerful demon. Can I prove that's not the case? Can I then know for certain even that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Maybe not. I'm going to have to pull back even further. So he places himself in this position wherein even simple truths and everything external to himself, and even the logical conclusions of his own mind, may be somewhat suspect. Now, this seems really rather ridiculous on the face of it, but again, this is a thought exercise, and he's winding back to the most fundamental assumptions and attempting to eliminate them. This idea of the dream world analogy, or of the evil, malicious trickster demon that's fooling us about the nature of external reality and even the operation of our own worlds, it might be a little bit abstract to you, because many of us at least, don't believe that there is any kind of all-powerful external being. But no doubt you're familiar with contemporary theories regarding the universe being some kind of simulation, that we're all plugged into some computer system like in the film The Matrix, where all human beings have been turned into living batteries by machines, and we have been stored, our physical bodies are stored in a series of pods that you see here in a clip from the film The Matrix with Keanu Reeves. And everything we perceive is really just electrochemical signals being beamed into our brains by the machine overlords. So this idea of the false reality that is constructed around us, that exists only in our minds, that's deceiving us about eating a steak, or about getting to work every day and getting into our cars or talking with another person, it's all just a fabrication that's beamed into our brains by a computer, or it's all just a simulation. That universe is a simulation theory that's gained a little bit of popularity recently. That's in essence a contemporary reflection of Descartes' worst case scenario. Descartes then goes back to that question. In that worst case scenario, what can I know for certain without doubt or assumptions? And Descartes comes up with this answer. As the most fundamental truth, the most basic truth that cannot be doubted, that would be irrational to doubt, even in the worst case scenario, even as he's being deceived at every moment by an omnipotent, malicious trickster god who has it out for poor Descartes, and that everything, every iota of his power is oriented around deceiving this man, such that he can't even believe that 1 plus 1 equals 2. He can't be certain of it. Even then, there is one thing of which he can be certain. And from this one axiomatic truth that has to be correct, everything else will follow in Descartes' philosophy. It is this: cogito ergo sum, je pense donc je suis, or I think, therefore I am. In other words, even if the worst case scenario exists, I can be certain that I exist. Why? Because, well, not my physical body per se, or even my brain. Maybe this doesn't exist, but my mind does. I know that because even if I was being fooled about the existence of an external reality, even if somebody was tricking me into believing that 1 plus 1 equals 2, I have to be conscious. I have to exist. My mind has to exist in order to be fooled. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Contemporary biochemists, for instance, and some naturalists will assert that consciousness is just an illusion. For instance, Sam Harris, one of the famed four horsemen of the New Atheism that was so popular about 15 years ago, along with Dan Dennett and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, asserted at one point that consciousness is really just an illusion, that we think we're thinking. We think we have some kind of internal reality or some mind. That's bald-faced idiocy, quite frankly. The very assumption that consciousness is an illusion assumes that there's something to be fooled by the illusion. So it's a nonsensical term. It's like saying you have a square circle or you have a married bachelor. saying that nothing is being fooled or being convinced of the illusion of consciousness, that is, it assumes consciousness to be fooled, is irrational. You'll find that much of what Sam Harris actually has to say about most things philosophical comes down to irrationality, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that for Descartes, and it's seemingly axiomatically obviously true, if there's something there to be fooled, if I'm there to be fooled, then I must exist in some sense. Now, from this observation, Descartes then begins to build his entire philosophy. Now, this video lecture has been quite extensive. What I'm going to do is, rather than apply Descartes' theories myself, we'll spend some time in our interactive class thinking about how and why Harlan Ellison is attempting to present the theories or allude to the theories of Descartes in his representation of this monstrous supercomputer. As a bit of groundwork, I'd ask you to think about two things over the coming week. First, think about Descartes and the animal machine, and also think about Am and the connection between Am as a creature and monster and Descartes' theories as we discuss them. Very briefly, what I mentioned in the last video was Descartes distinguished between human beings and animals in this way, in the most fundamental way. He says that an animal may be viewed as a machine which, having been made out of the hands of God, is incomparably better ordained than any of those invented by man. So animals are these machines. Human beings are not quite biological machines. We are animated by a spiritual principle or soul. And secondly, think about that application of I think, therefore I am, and its meaning for Descartes and how it fits into his overall project and his philosophical scheme, how those things might be playing out in Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.